Oh yeah. All right. So let me just fire up Rhino. Sometimes I had Windows going, but I didn't have Rhino going. All right, well, we'll wait a second for it to fire up. Anybody try stuff with this and get good results or run into any issues or problems that I can address? I mean, if not, don't worry about it. I'll go through it again. So yeah, I'll open up my solar analysis example here. What's important is that, you don't have to have Grasshopper up all the time. You can, set the time of year that you want to look at, or just the time of day even, and then bake out the mesh. What I like about this is, I mean, there is actual data behind this, right? Um, but it gets to what we do best, I think, as architects, which is to take data and actually visualize it, right? So this is a representation class. So the graphic representation of data is very much in our wheelhouse, and I think it actually helps us design better, right? More intuitively. It's sort of numbers can be very abstract, right? Especially when you have lots of big numbers. And so, I think one of the things we can immediately spot are colors, right? Like, we sort of have these bright red spots and we go, that seems to be a problem. Um, so anyway, uh, now this is fired up. All right, let's let it just get going here. I'm going to move this out of the way really quickly. Let's see if I can. Yeah. All right, perfect. So I can see my layers. And before I went through the SunPath file and baked a bunch of things in. So here, for instance, is the SunPath layer that I made. You can see it's quite literally the path of the sun through the sky, overlaid three-dimensionally with a compass, so you can see where the cardinal directions are. At least how we had those inputted in. And then, of course, we can turn on, let's say, summer rays and summer sun spheres. And we can do the same for the winter, right? So that one seemed fairly self-explanatory, so fairly quick. Nothing that sort of derailed my system yesterday. What you see I have up now is just a mesh. It's in rendered mode. I'll just turn it to shaded mode, sort of speed things up a little bit, right? So there's the result of, let's say, looking at the annual average of solar radiation hitting my site, given that this location is in Las Vegas, Nevada, right? So I baked that in, and so I can keep that up and use it as I want. I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to go ahead and turn my default layer back on, which just has my regular geometry here. There we are. So I made a ground plane, and or any site information that I have that's immediate. Neighbors, if I had neighbors that could potentially cast a shadow, then I would include those as well, right? In fact, let me do that just to demonstrate this a little better. Maybe be helpful if I simulated something closer to what you guys are actually going to be doing in studio. So I'll just quickly draw a few neighbors here. Let me put that on the default layer as well here. Come on now. Hey, all right. Yeah, I've never experienced this before, but I'm just noticing now that this gets really sluggish when I'm recording in Zoom. It didn't used to do that to me. So I'm not sure what's going on here, but I suspect it's more settings that I could probably tweak somewhere. I'm just going to put maybe a taller south-facing. Well, maybe I won't. I won't put it directly in the center here. I'll put it about midway. Here we go. Sorry, I can't even make up my mind. So, okay, there we are. That won't probably do anything during the summertime. It might cast a little bit of a shadow. I don't know. We'll see. All right, so just to make sure that this is saved, sometimes when you run a big, heavy Grasshopper file, It helps to sort of save things in case you hit the point of no return and you get that spinning blue wheel forever, or the color wheel if you're on the Mac side. So I just make sure I save stuff before I do anything drastic that might be computationally heavy, that I might end up having to end a process that's not responding or something like that, right? So I'm going to type in Grasshopper. There we are. Just wait for that to fire up. I can tell that we've been going here for another like a week or two now, because I've started to I found that there's certain qualities of voice, like airline pilots sort of have the way they talk that sort of put you at ease when they're talking about ascent and descent, and the fact there's going to be turbulence. So I try to mimic that when we're doing something that has such a steep learning curve and lots of opportunities for mistakes or errors, or the computer goofing up, or memory leaks or something like that. So direct radiation, right? That's the file we're talking about today. All right, and it's already asking me for the weather file. That's for darn sure. So I'll go ahead and, oh, everything's set to true. Ouch. Well, okay, mine's gonna start calculating things right away, which is interesting. Set to 2. Let's see here. You can see I have a bunch of orange bands, right? So for instance, this was the preview of the file when it opened up, and that orange means that there wasn't any data. Slowly, it's starting to sort of fill in the data with the weather file, and then it'll remember if you had this open in the Rhino file, and if you had Rhino geometry, referenced in. So, but this is one of those cases where I'm going to have my building and my site plugged in for geometry. I'm going to take some of those new context buildings that I just quickly blocked out with some solids. I'm going to plug those in for context, just so I can see, their effect. I don't necessarily want to map solar radiation on them, but I do want them to. I do want to sort of understand their effect on everything in my site, all things that could be happening potentially. Okay, so there it is. All right. Grasshopper disappeared. Let's see if we can bring that back up just to do that. All right. Okay. And so one of the things I could do, first of all, I would probably set these back to false if I'm going to tweak too many things here. This is yearly, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this to false. Turn this to false. All right, if I like the grid size of 2, maybe I'll up that just a little bit for my demonstration. I'll up it to 3. What that means is that it's talking about the size of the cell for the grid that it sort of populates. So the smaller the grid size, the more grid cells it has, therefore the more data, the more granular the measurement becomes. And that can again grow exponentially. The smaller the grid size, the more data it has to sort of crunch at any given time. Okay, so I already have this all set. Let's see here. Yeah, you can sort of see I have the ground plane and my original Rhino model set as the test ground surface, right? In order to do that, I right click and I say set multiple BREPs, right? BREPs are just a fancy word for polysurfaces. And then I can go ahead and select things in Rhino and bring them right into Grasshopper. All right, so I'm dragging from left to right just to select everything inside, just this building. If I go from right to left, it'll select everything, right? I don't want that. All right. And then select the context buildings masses. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on this one and say set multiple VREPs as well. And then select this solid, this solid, this solid. Just select some of those neighbors, particularly the ones to the south, east, and west. Those are going to be casting some shadows. East and west, they'll be casting longer, deeper shadows. Of course, during the wintertime, the south ones will also. So, All right, so I've set up those initial, or I've reset some of those initial ingredients, right? What we're going to measure, and then some of the context that's going to affect the measurements. So I can come over here. I'm just going to double check this north. If I want that to be 0, I'll go ahead and keep that there. If your north is actually skewed a little bit, right, because of the grid of downtown, and you've straightened it up, then you just need to know that angle, and you can just sort of, you can just look up what the angle for the grid of downtown Las Vegas is. And you could just set it here. You could just change it literally, like type in, I don't know if it'd be like, let's say just hypothetically it was 23 degrees or something like that. I don't know if it'd be 23 or negative 23. You just have to test that out. But grid size at 3, I'll start there. I'll leave this at 0.25. All right. And now let's talk a little bit about this, right? So this is going from January 1st all the way to December 30th. So that's going to give us an annual reading. But let's say I just want sort of the summer months. So I might go with, month. Let's go with June 6th to August, whatever the last day of August is. Last day of August, 30th or 31st? Anybody know? I don't even know.
31st.
31st. Amazing. All right. I don't even know how anybody remembers that. The only reason I remember there's 31 days in January is because my birthday's in January. So let's see. In February is the weird one, right? So yeah. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to measure the summer months right now. And I might do the same thing then for the winter months. And then again for like a sort of spring, autumn. Spring and autumn are going to mirror each other. So I can just do one and just say spring/autumn. Go ahead and set this to true, this first gate. It's going to go ahead and do this calculation. Oh, yeah. Shouldn't take too long. This last one is where everything really goes down. So let's see. All right. Again, Grasshopper is still there, just disappeared behind Rhino, which is annoying to say the least. All right. And so then this last gate, right? So this is where it all happens. It puts together the geometry, the context, where north is. It sort of maps just the part of the sky matrix data for the analysis period that we gave it, the time, and plugs that in, and then spits out this sort of radiation mesh down here at the end. So when I hit this, let me go ahead and hit save really quickly one more time before I hit this, because sometimes it takes it. This could take anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 minutes. I feel like on my side, at least it did yesterday once I adjust things down. Let's see. Of course, now that everybody's watching and I'm doing this and it's recorded, it'll take like for years or something, ages, eons. All right. So, but that's essentially it. Once it's done. There we go. That was quick. All right. Sounds like maybe the first time it does things, it takes a little while. So one of the things I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to turn that off for just a minute. We can see just the map itself, right? Just that mesh. I'm not convinced that that would really be that light of a blue on a summer day. And that we wouldn't have a lot of, there's shading there. Okay, well, we are getting blasted to the west. So maybe that's the case. I don't know. All right. But it makes me wonder if like there's something just kind of goofy with this geometry. But at any rate, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that before I do anything else, bring up Grasshopper. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to call this summer radiation, right? And I'm just going to make it something that I can bake this stuff into. Hey, all right. So basically this is the output, radiation mesh. When I select it, there it is. And I'm just going to right click and say bake. And it's going to ask me which layer in Rhino do you want to bake this into? And I'm just going to select summer radiation, hit OK. All right. Now I can toggle this back to false. Right? And I can also change this time period. So let's say I want to do winter now. I could do December, January, February, March, April, May. Yeah, kind of I guess you could say winter is sort of December, January, February, right? That's the way I think of it anyway. From December 1st to Feb 28. All right. Not sure what that would happen if I actually included 31, but probably just have a bunch of blank information. All right, so let's see here. Yeah, so what I want to do is just sort of compare that to the winter condition, right? The sun's lower in the sky, but the ambient temperature is usually lower, as we all know. Again, I'm going to hit save and hit save before I do much of anything else, especially before I hit this toggle this true or this false to true. All right, here we go. With any luck, it'll take hardly any time again. Let's see here. I believe the grid size is just units. So if you're in units of feet, this would be 3 feet by 3 feet units. Oh, okay, there we go. Ta-da. Now I didn't have to replug in any of the geometry because it was already there, and it's on a layer in Rhino that I turned off. You can see that in the wintertime, this taller building really casts pretty good shadow. That's because the sun is the majority of the time is sort of lower in the sky, and so the shadows are deeper. So that's not a huge surprise. Some of the top parts are still getting some pretty decent solar radiation there. Interesting. And then the north is getting pretty much nothing. So not a huge surprise there. All right. So what this might tell me again is that I need to start worrying about the west during the summertime. Parts of along the south facade need shading. Wherever I have what do you call it? Windows or apertures, right? So it's not that I want to block those off. I might want windows. I might want to bring in light. Might want to celebrate sunlight. But there's a way to do it without baking everybody inside the building, right? There's nothing more uncomfortable than sitting in a glass container in a sunny day. If you don't believe me, sit in your car in a supermarket parking lot for an hour. All right, so greenhouse effect. Let's see. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and bake this one out as well. And I'm going to call this winter. Make a new layer, winter radiation. I like to keep these things on different layers, and that way I can turn things on or off as I need to later. Bake. Winter radiation with lots of A's in it for some reason. Stupid keyboard. A good craftsman never blames his crappy tools. All right, so let's see here. Let me just turn off Grasshopper for a moment. Yeah. Okay, there's winter. I can turn that off. There's summer. Right. Sometimes people like this grid. And I can show you how you can turn those on, but I can just go to render view and you can see that you get quite literally that rendered mesh, just like it looked like in Grasshopper. Let's see what it looks like in this other thing that we made, the copy of technical. Let's see. This one, I can go in if it's not already toggled and tell it that I want to see all the mesh edges and things like that. So let's see what this actually does, though. It takes a minute for technical to actually compute the first time because it's got to figure out all the line work and stuff. All right. So that's just giving us edges and hidden lines. Yeah, all right. So let me just go to the options and see what other options I have here. And again, you don't necessarily have to do this, but I like to do it sometimes just to sort of see. Appearance, no, a view. Here we go. View, display modes. Yeah, I have to remind myself what I'm doing here. All right. So background, solid color of white. I'm not really seeing that for some reason. Shade objects, color, material usage, the rendering materials. Yep, standard shading. All right, visibility, show edges, show creases, show seams. Let's see here. We have point clouds and points, annotations. I'm trying to think of if we have show seams, show clipping planes, show text. We do have show curves on. So at the very least, there's a workaround there. But let me just double check these things. Objects. Let's see what kinds of things we have under points, curves, and lines. Curve settings, use objects color. Okay. Intersection lines. I'll just use single color for all of those. Set those to black. Curves. I'm going to set those to use black as well. Okay. Other settings. All right. So we have it so that it's going to do curves. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tell it to convert the mesh wireframe to curves. See if I can find the place to do that here. My guess is that we could use the same one here. Let's see, extract wireframe. Surface, solids, meshes, sub-Gs. Yeah, all right. Fantastic. And this is all one big mesh. Okay, so it's going to tell us it's going to create a lot of curves. And I'm saying, yeah, that's kind of the idea. I might regret this. Let's see. The idea is that, I want to see actually all the grid lines, right? So if that's the case, then what I can do is I can convert them to curves. The curves will actually show up in the render mode. Let's see here. Just sort of waiting around. Said something about making like 10,000 curves, which seems like an extreme amount, but go ahead and close that. Oh, it looks like it's done. So let me see. Cell, CRV, SEL, select curves. No objects added to collection. I wonder why. That's odd. Did I hit like cancel instead? Like here, let me just try that again. I'm not sure what it's doing here. I never seem to know what it's doing. All right, output layer, current group output. Okay, yeah, that'll work probably. Group output, no. Should Rhino skip outputs there? No. Oh, okay. So I should have hit no. Okay, there we go. All right, that's much better. All right, so it did it, and it didn't take long at all. See what there's rendered mode. It's rendering those curves. So there you can actually see those grid lines now. That sort of mesh grid here. Let's see what technical is having a hard time because it's got lots of lines to compute. But let's see what it does here. Right. So anyway, there's again. Right now we're back to some of the stuff that we've already done in the past, right? Sort of looking at display modes, changing a few settings, making sure that we have the right things on and off, getting ready to export out to Illustrator or Photoshop, right? Not sure what it's doing here. Oh, I just dragged object. That's not good. Yeah, this is being really sluggish. Oy. All right. And technical just wants to crap out on me here. So I'll just set it to rendered. You can see what that looks like. That one's looking really nice. Right. So here you can clearly see the effect of these buildings. Oh, and for some reason, my left mouse, right mouse button. I love the design, like the look of the Apple mouse, but the way it actually works in reality, sometimes it doesn't really understand right mouse button versus left mouse button. Usually it does, but the most inopportune times it seems to not care. There we go. All right, so I'm just dragging my view around and not objects around my screen. So now we can begin to get a sense of where we have problem issues. And let me just turn this to maybe Axon, right? Isometric mode. Oh, come on. That's from the Northeast. Not a big surprise. There's not a lot going on. So we'll probably look at the Southeast and Southwest views, sort of better understand what's going on with sunlight, right? East, South, and West are where the sun's coming from at any given time of the day. Yeah, right. So at this point, I don't know why it switched to, I accidentally switched it to shaded. At this point, I could actually just go to edit capture to file, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that with this one and then also with the Southwest view. Parallel, viewport, transparent background, sure, why not? Scale of 1 in this case, and I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. It's going to ask me, do I want a JPEG or a PNG? I'm going to pick PNG, or I guess you could pick TIFF as well if you want. Sort of a lossless file format. Let's see. I'll call this radiation. I'll try to spell a little better too. Radiation, camel case it here, capital S, summer diagram. All right. And I'm going to just save that to my desktop for right now. Look at that command line. It'll tell you when it's actually done. All right. Image successfully saved. Now I can go to the next view. Let's go with the Southwest. That way we can sort of see inside what's happening on the west part. Or if you prefer perspectives, you can do that, right? Or sort of adjust these things around. And I'm going to go ahead and bring these out as well. One of the things I would say is to sort of, think about these as, again, you can sort of look at it, make some conclusions, maybe even annotate the conclusions with leaders on these diagrams for now, because I think both for yourself and for me, when I'm sort of looking at your work and talking about it with you, as well as anybody who's reviewing your work, they can sort of see your thought process, right? So not only they see this, but they see, well, how is he or she analyzing this? What are they thinking when it comes to this big red area up here? Do they ignore that? Sort of, trying to understand what the logics are behind this and how you were making your decisions. So anyway, capture to file. So I wouldn't be afraid to sort of bring these into Illustrator and then start to annotate them, right? Of course, with labels like, summer radiation average or something, right? But also with, with sort of thinking about, well, this is a problem area, or this isn't so bad. Or, this is a problem, and I think I can think of maybe 2 or 3 different strategies. You need to block it with horizontal louvers or something in order to bounce some of that light in and still get daylight in, but not have all the heat gain or something like that, right? So, again, I recommend sort of thinking about these things so that when somebody looks at them, they can sort of understand what you're internalizing from the data, seeing the data like this, and then what you're taking with you and as you make further design decisions. That's my only point. All right, I'll save that PNG as well. Boom. All right. Okay. So there's that. there's nothing stopping you, again, like I mentioned before, from doing some perspectives as well. You know, you might tell me, um, let's see here. Although the closer you get, the more granular it sort of wants the grid to be. But I could zoom in. Let me actually turn summer off and turn winter on. There we go. Winter has more stuff in it, right? Ugh, come on. I'll zoom out a little bit. Right. So, you know, you could be sort of down here and sort of telling me that there's problem areas back here, or that it's not a problem because it's during the winter time, right? Uh, Interestingly, that building casts a wide shadow when it comes to this. So, oftentimes what I find is that you would want to sort of talk about a specific time of the day, specific, you know, maybe it's the evening time. It's like, you know, it's kind of interesting, right? In the wintertime or during even during the summertime, right? I guess depending on opening or closing hours, right? You could always have some sort of big event that happens right at opening, right? Like in the morning time, so that it makes this place something that you'd actually want to experience. Um, Closing time, let's say. So, for instance, I know a lot of places they'll like sort of dim the lights off and on, or something like that, to sort of talk about, hey, you know, it's 15 minutes until closing, or something like that, right? If they don't make the announcement over a loudspeaker, you could actually do that with the sun, right? So you can make this sort of weird thing where, you know, from the west, when the sun gets low enough, suddenly everything's illuminated, and it's sort of the sign to start to wrap it up, right? Wrap it up. All right. But again, you can always go through and start to show, you know, what these situations mean, or at least what they mean to you, and how you're interpreting them, how you're responding to them with your design moves, right? This is a mesh. Remember, I turned off my actual Rhino geometry. So if I start to move some things around in Rhino, I need to open up Grasshopper again and then reanalyze it. And then, you know, I can bake that out again and show the results. So for instance, right? Let's say I first of all turn this off. Yeah. Um, Turn that on. Still selecting all of these curves, which is annoying. But let's say I select this extrusion, I make it longer and extend outwards like a shade or something like that, right? Then I'd have to rerun everything in Grasshopper again, right, in order to sort of understand what the implications are, and to sort of see how far of a shadow it casts, and how much shade it's actually providing or not providing, depending on the time that of the year that I'm measuring, right? So does that make sense? And I would encourage you to do that, right? Not only can you, um, what I like about the axons, like if you say north, southeast, and southwest axons, is the next time you go back and you sort of, you know, after you've changed some things around and you want to do the analysis, you can go right back to the same views. And so you can have snapshots of your process, right? And how things either get better or worse in some cases with the actual solar radiation. Okay. So I think that's really important as well, right? When you sort of show progression, and you start to show snapshots of things that they're all in the same orientation around the same scale, and so they just look like, oh, okay. Suddenly people's brains are able to put that together really quickly in their head. They can sort of understand it as, you know, this sort of evolution, right, of your design, um, as it gets better and better, right, or more responsive to more information. All right, so at this point, man, I am totally going to, first of all, I'm going to, Grasshopper still open, and with it still open, I'm going to set these all to false, and then save that file again, so it doesn't automatically try to solve everything all at once the next time I open it. Just going through, there we go. Save. Close that file out. Close Grasshopper. Make sure that Rhino's saved, right? I have all those radiation meshes saved in different layers. I've already exported out some PNGs so I can play around with those in Illustrator or Photoshop or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can get Windows to. Windows is being very sluggish. I have a feeling that as soon as I close Windows and Parallels, my computer will become responsive again. Yeah, not sure what's going on here. This didn't used to be an issue. It's kind of odd. Oh, even that was a pain. All right, so in the meantime, just going to bring up Illustrator. You shut down. Come on. Is that supposed to look like an A and an I or something? It looks almost like a K to me. But anyway, whatever. All right, I'm going to move this over. Let's see here. Maybe over to the side. Give myself a little more space here. Get rid of parallels. Just turn it off entirely. All right. So this is the Illustrator file I had the other day when we were talking about perspectives and axons. So I'll go ahead and dump this into another artboard here. File, place. I want to start placing images, other line work, vector files, other AI files I've generated. I can use that file and then place. It's place instead of import. And let's see, desktop date modified. October 3rd, 2022 seems a bit far away. There we go. Today at 10:12 a.m. All right. I can insert 2 or 3 things at a time, more than one thing at a time. What it's going to do is it's going to have me snap here and then click here to insert the other one. These are actually much larger than our artboard, dramatically so, right? I can go ahead and just scale that thing down, holding down the shift key on my keyboard so that it scales proportionally. Same thing over here. Bring this over. I'm going to use this free transform tool. Make sure I'm just scaling the image here. You notice that with that, I can, if I get close to something like over here, I can just rotate it or, whatever. But okay. And then once I figure out how they both fit on the screen somehow, I would probably be very precise to make them all both the same. Let me just move this out of the way. The same size. So, up here when my window is larger, it actually has the X, Y, width, and height parameters, but they're hidden right here in transform. I guess it doesn't think there's enough room here. And so I can just toggle those on here and say, well, the width I want to be 6.436 seems just like oddly specific to me. When I think 6 inches will work. We'll just make this 6 inches wide as well. That way they're the same. And then we can also position them in, let's see, I kind of want, oh, you know what? I want it to be less than 6 inches. You know why? Because I'm using an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I know that 6 plus 6 is over 11.5, isn't it? Although there's a transparent background. So no, this will work, right? For better or worse, I'm putting these side by side, but maybe I want to put them underneath each other. There we go. And so from here, I could begin to label them, caption them, or whatever. One thing I recommend if you start to tag this thing up, oh man, I haven't I haven't loaded the new my new favorite typeface that Alex pointed out the other day. I'm not going to use Comic Sans. Let's see. I'll just go with some Helvetica Neue or just regular Helvetica maybe. So anyway, if I do that, I might actually bring the text size down a bit. And let's see here. I might say hot and bright problem area. Strategy would be to cover with reflective materials, right? The roof, I mean, it's actually strange, right? Like we have like these roofs that don't actually reflect light, but you can actually reflect a lot of the light away from your building these days. It's just a matter of the building industry catching up with science, I think. Let's see. Another one might be lorem ipsum. There we go. Come on now. Just want a box. There we go. Bright glare and heat gain. Strategy would be to add horizontal shading or louvers. Right. So I'm just sort of throwing these out there. It's kind of a lame thing to say. But at this point, if I was going to have several of these points, I might try to think about which ones are higher, which ones are lower in the diagram, arrange them accordingly, line them up with the left justify. And then from there, I can then add leaders, right? So I might say, okay, this is about the roof. Let me just zoom in so I get a little better at this. I need to set a stroke color, so let's set that stroke color to black. I might start here. I'll adjust that line weight. Oops. And then meet up with it there. Select those. Let's go to stroke weight and change that line thickness. Should definitely not be the thickest thing on the screen, just little leader lines, right? Another thing I can do is I can change the endpoint over here. So I went start point, end point when I drew this. So the start point, go to arrowheads, and I can add an arrowhead or a little leader circle or something, right? So yeah, I might then just sort of select this, make a copy, paste in place, move that down. No reason to reinvent the wheel, right? Then use this selection tool, not the overall selection tool, but the direct selection tool. Just try to select this endpoint and move that around, right? So I might move that around up over here, right? Or wherever it goes. Okay. Right. This would need a caption of some sort, right? Say like winter months, maybe in parentheses, December through February, December 1st through February 28th, solar radiation readout or something average from the southeast and then from the southwest. And, so again, make these useful to you, right? All of you have different tastes and sensibilities when it comes to how you might format these. But at the end of the day, like, make these useful to sort of saying, okay, here's what I learned from the diagram. Now, here's how I'm going to respond. So the next time I run another analysis, I can compare and I can sort of see if I'm making progress or not, right? Did that work? Did this strategy of adding horizontal shading work, right? Or, whatever, right? So does that help a little bit in sort of trying to understand how you can use these diagrams? And like I say, I keep using this word, but I think it's important, using them in an instrumental way, right? Like they're an instrument for you to sort of get feedback. It's another feedback loop to help inform your design, right? I think it's really important. And look, it's kind of interesting because it's not like a bunch of science with numbers and stuff like that. There is, data involved, but when you can break it down like this, and then you can start to move things around and minimize red areas if you want, or add red areas in specific places, or at specific times of the year, maybe that's a goal. Then there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's within reason. Then yeah, this can be a really useful tool for you to sort of understand your geometry in relation to solar geometry, right? Okay. Super important in the desert. And I will remind you, for your studio projects, the goal isn't to get rid of all red, orange, or yellow inside, right? We want to bring in light, right? But we have to do it responsibly, and we have to do it. We have to design it, right? So we have to also do it in a way that choreographs it for the experience for people inside, right? So again, I mentioned, actually, I showed you guys a little bit of Tadeo Ando's work on studio yesterday afternoon. But that kind of stuff, right? Like the kind of stuff where you say, I actually don't need a complicated, folded, wavy, curvy surface if it's going to be almost a sort of canvas or palette that I can paint on with light, right, throughout the day and have it change. So, those sorts of things are, I think, really, really kind of fundamentals to, you can always then overlay complexity on top of that if you want geometrically. But I say we start simple with planes and simple openings, right? And those are the easiest things for you to start to make in your paper with your paper models in Studio as well, right? So it's a lot harder to make something thick and doubly curved out of paper, right? Paper can do single curvature, but not double curvature, right? I know that because every time I see a map of the world laid out and flattened out, a globe, basically a sphere flattened out, everything's all distorted, right? And in fact, they even have to start ripping and tearing parts of the globe in order to sort of lay it out flat, right? So let's see here. So built within that, there's a logic to the paper where if it starts as something that's flat, then there's a logic built in that you can always flatten it back out and manufacture it somehow, right? So I think that's also important when we're looking at experimenting with the materials, right? That'd be much different, let's say, if we were working with clay, or if we were casting things out of plaster, or if we were using acrylic or polycarbonate, but with a heat gun and sort of melting it and bending it, right? So all of those sort of lend themselves to different ways of exploring based off of the properties of the material and how you're working it and the tools at your disposal. So, I'm trying, that the reason why I sort of framed and this exercise the way I did, sort of scaffolded it this way, is because I knew that you guys would be working with paper, so that, you can sort of have a really, hopefully a really productive back and forth between the digital and the physical, right? But this is one of the interesting, great things about the digital model. It really does become a sort of database. You can start to plug in all kinds of tools into it to sort of analyze it, understand it in different ways, right? Ways that would be difficult, or maybe not even possible with the analog sense, right? So I like to sort of think about each of these mediums as something that each one is good at particular things, and that they're different, and the sort of diversity of what they can and can't do, right? When you start to put them together, is a strength, right? So you can start to get a lot of different ways of sort of looking at your design problem and your response to it. All right. What I would like for you guys to do is to go through this process and start making these sort of diagrams, start annotating them, start to better understand, what you're measuring and what you're internalizing from that measurements, these diagrams, and then how you might go about and adjusting the design accordingly, right? In a perfect world, we could just turn this would be like a display mode, right? We could just see the stuff and we could just change that and it wouldn't take forever. Maybe as computation gets faster and faster and faster, and it seems to grow exponentially still, Moore's law still held up somehow here lately, that maybe that'll be the case one day, right? And ideally, it'd be great if we didn't have to load a bunch of plugins, right? I mean, I think that's one of the more interesting things about where the technology is going these days. It seems like um, in order to sort of use some of these tools, they're really complicated. You have to have like almost a PhD in building science in order to understand how they work. And then even to get them on your computer, you have to like download a bunch of patches and plugins and install them in weird ways, right? Instead of it just working, right? So I think hopefully, I see a sort of sea change happening. I've been experimenting with AI, for instance, these diffusion models. I don't even have to write code or plug in a bunch of widgets in Grasshopper. I can tell in plain English what I want, right? I think that's a real interesting way of computers beginning to understand and what we want them to do and how we work with them, a human computer interface that's based on plain language, rather than the computer's language. It's another way to make the computers work for us instead of the other way around. Sometimes it feels that way, right? All right, so that's what I want. I want to sort of overcome some of these learning curves. I want you guys to try these things out. If you haven't yet, you have the weekend to. But I'd like to do is to see a summer, a winter, and a spring/fall sort of reading of some of these radiation maps if you can, right? And keep some of those neighbors on. And so it's really important. What I'd recommend doing is actually, if you're using your downtown Las Vegas map, that model, it's really large, right? And so you can imagine that it would take a while for it to compute things out, right? So what I'd recommend doing is sort of taking your digital model, or maybe you just take this one of your planar models that you're experimenting with right now, place it in your site, and then just take the block, the piece of the city block, or make your own that simulates the ground around your building. You can have the neighbors on, but you're only going to put those in as context to see where they're obstructing sun rays. And that way you're just measuring your building just like this. You're just measuring your building and then the site just immediately around it. Okay. In fact, I would say this extends out further. You don't need to go out into the streets or that kind of stuff with it. You can just sort of get the gist. I don't know if you guys can see where my cursor is, but sort of drawing a plot around this. All right. Does that make sense? And are there any questions about that? So for those of you in studio, that seems like that's pretty direct. For those of you who aren't in the studio, Contrell, you might take some of your massing, or you might just make a generic massing in your site. Was it in Hong Kong? Yeah. So yeah, and then just sort of see like, well, okay, where are there shadows being cast on this site, right? How tall up do I get before this neighbor to the south stops casting a shadow, right? You can start to at least understand, even if you don't have a specific form yet, you can begin to make an extrusion just to sort of see where how the sun conditions and light conditions change and the shadow conditions change between the hot season, the cold season, and the swing seasons. Okay. And it's the same with you, Bijan. If you have something, an old project that you're using, you have that site model or something, I recommend just doing the same thing. The question is, do you simplify the building model or not in order to sort of get some usable data?
Yeah, I had several downtown sites, so I'm gonna just kind of focus on one,
Yep.
and it was modular, so it's easy to just build it again for
Okay.
something specific. But I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you something.
Sure.
Um, when you opened up, or sorry, when you closed, what happens when you close Rhino? Because you went into Grasshopper and you shut everything to false
Yeah.
because of why? I'm trying to understand how to close them and what to do to
So
reopen them so they
with
remember.
this Grasshopper file, you have to save it. It's a specific, it's its own file, GH file, right?
Do
So
you save all the things that you've done, or do you set it back to neutral so you can start fresh after you bake them?
so I didn't so I set the gates to be false again. So the next time I open up this file, it doesn't try to like do all the calculations all at once. I can go through and define the variables again before I start to selectively hit true from left to right. But I still left everything plugged in, like the geometry and all that stuff plugged in. So if I open up that Grasshopper file with that Rhino file, it'll remember that reference Rhino geometry, and I won't have to re-reference it in again. Okay, I could open
Okay.
up that Grasshopper file in a new Rhino file, and then suddenly it's orange again. It doesn't have any information in it, and I have to then right-click and say set multiple breps. And then in the new Rhino
Okay.
file, I would there's a Grasshopper file and there's a Rhino file. So the Grasshopper stuff really is just a mind map. And then if I want some of the outputs, any of the outputs from Grasshopper, I have to bake them back into Rhino if I want them permanently. That makes sense?
Yes.
So it's like
Okay.
the
So before
Grasshopper
I
is like
wasn't.
the Grasshopper is like the genotype. And then all the stuff I bake out as I start to move and tweak all the genes or the parameters, right, are the phenotypes. Does that make a little more
Okay.
sense? Yeah, as a sort of biological
Yes. No, no,
metaphor.
I get it. But so then since you have those baked out, now you can open up your Rhino file without the Grasshopper file open
Correct. Yep.
because
Yep,
those are in there
exactly.
as a layer.
Yeah, these meshes that I took the PNGs of, those were already baked. Those are just meshes I baked into Rhino from Grasshopper. So once Grasshopper just finished that simulation, generated this mesh, I was able to bake it into Rhino. That mesh is an interesting thing. Unlike surfaces, meshes save not only the sort of vertices and edges of polygons and the facets, but each either face or polygon gets assigned a color, and it can remember that as well. So that's why this thing renders the way it does. It's just a mesh, and that's a unique property of a mesh. But
Okay, so real quick, when you shutting down, you would go into to Grasshopper for after you have everything baked. You would go into Grasshopper first, hit everything false, and then you would close Grasshopper and then close Rhino.
yeah, I typically try to make sure, do I want to save whatever changes I made to Grasshopper file? If so, I save and then I can close Grasshopper, or I purposely close Grasshopper and then not save, right? So yeah, I would do that first and then close out Rhino afterwards. Grasshopper is running over top of Rhino, so that's why I do that order. I typically try to close out. You can close Rhino and then it'll also come back and say, do you want to save your Rhino file? Oh, and by the way, these files were open in Grasshopper. Do you want to save those as well before we close everything out and you forget about it? So it does do that for you if you accidentally close Rhino and it goes through the close down sequence, but you haven't saved a change in Grasshopper.
Okay.
So, but yeah,
And then just like your Rhino modeling, right? You've got a different date, right? Or certain evolution of the same base Rhino model as we keep going. You're gonna have that just with Grasshopper as well. You're gonna have the base code script that we pulled from, and then you would be saving like different variations of that as you go. I'm trying to understand your workflow, how because you want to make sure you can always go
yeah.
back to that original script for a different model, right?
Yeah, no, I would still open up the same script. But what I do is I'd go back to the ingredients where it says give me the geometry to measure, give me the geometry that's the context. I would right click on those and I would then select new geometry in a new file.
Okay, based on the same original script.
Yeah, it's still the same file. I just keep opening the same file each time. I can open up in any Rhino file and then bring in Rhino geometry and reference it into Grasshopper and do the same analysis on this thing that I've been working on for this class in Rhino versus something else that I've been working on a different class in Rhino or something like that, right?
Okay.
So you just bring
Okay.
in the same recipe, you just change the ingredients that you're plugging into it at the very beginning at the left. And then all the right stuff, then the information flows from left to right and propagates and changes.
Okay.
Okay. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, because we were talking yesterday, about how, we have the script and then we're just utilizing that someone has built
Yeah.
and we're changing parameters
Yeah.
based on our model. So I'm going to open up the same script on a different model and a different site,
Yep.
and I'm going to change those parameters.
Yeah,
And then
exactly
as
right.
long as I put everything back to false, I can just save that. I can save over that Grasshopper script and nothing changed,
The
right?
the reason I set things to false before I close is just so they're set to false the next time I open the file up. And so that way everything isn't set to true when I first open up the file and it tries to do everything computationally all at once. So
If it's a
those
different
gates,
model or whatever it was.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So those true false gates are there so that you can very deliberately turn them on and off so that you can do things step by step. So that's why I try to turn them all to false before and save before I close. So when I open it up again, it's not trying to take whatever I was doing the last time and then trying to do it, with whatever grid size I was using and and then I'm stuck there for 10 minutes waiting for it to compute. And
Okay.
you know what I mean? So like before I've done
Yeah.
anything, right? I'm sort of dead in the water, right? So
I
um
guess my other question would be then, as we're linking these, weather, weather data, and we're linking certain things, then how is that not linked? Because you set that to false, how does that not link at a different site, at a different model? If I set this to Las Vegas McCarran Airport, and then I shut everything to false, and then save over that Rhino file, and then I have another site, let's say in Hong Kong, what Kentrell's
all right, well
doing.
as soon as you hit true, for the first gate, it's going to ask you for a weather file. So then you would load a Hong Kong weather file,
Okay. Okay.
right? So it's that you're just changing the ingredients that you're inputting in. That could
Okay.
be the geometry, that could be the context, that could be the weather, the weather data for a particular location. Yeah. Does that does
Gotcha.
that make sense now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that did. Yeah, that summed it up.
Yeah. All right, good. If you think about that Rhino script, is that graph is just it's almost like if you just hit one of these tools over here, right? But you can actually see all the mind map of what's going on under the hood. Right? So that's the way I sort of liken it. So you can go back in and instead of in the command line changing some settings, you have sliders, right? And you can sort of see what the output of that slider, what it plugs into is the input for the next widget. And what that widget produces is the output, which becomes the input for the next widget. So yeah. And that said, you can edit the process, right? So that's the other nice thing about it is you can go back in and um, I also showed you guys maybe we can double click on some of those widgets and see what the code is underneath them, right? So some of them are written in either C# probably or Python or maybe some Visual Basic. And although Visual Basic I don't think is object oriented, so I think a lot of people would probably either go with Python or C#. And you can see like what's going on under the hood. It's literally just somebody writing code and then putting that into a widget. And all the variables or all the sort of inputs for that script then become little nodes on the left-hand side, and all the outputs that it generates become nodes on the right-hand side. So you can just sort of do it visually without having to really learn how to code, like how I had to do it a long time ago. So anyway, does that help? So we've gone from using a computer, sort of replicate what we did with a pencil, with a mouse and a keyboard, to being able to write code, to being able to just write simple instructions for it in plain English. That's where it's sort of going. It's kind of interesting time to be alive. That's for darn sure. So let's see here. And like I haven't really dressed this up at all. But I would say, again, get the information on there. You can continue to format things the way you want later on. Get this information on there, get it up, try it, break something. If you break it, don't worry about the implications of like not finishing everything all at once, right? Just be prepared to talk about, well, what happened, and be prepared to sort of figure out with me how we unbreak it, right? So on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, what I'd like to do is just maybe an informal show and tell with where you guys are at. We can sort of take a look. I can give you guys some feedback. We can troubleshoot some more things. I'll also go through some of the wind stuff with you guys next week. And then, hopefully we'll get up to a point on that a week from today, right? Before the next big long weekend, you'll have like, you'll be able to just sort of run with this and you'll be able to do it multiple times as you're sort of working back and forth on your studio projects. Okay. It's not lost on me that at that point in the weekend, I think I'll be leaving for a week, and it'll be 4th of July weekend or week for everybody. So I'm trying to figure out if there's anything to have you guys do over the week, or just maybe just let you guys work, which I'm fine with doing. I think technically the only day off to the university is July 4th. I don't know if that's a Tuesday or Wednesday. I can't remember, but we just won't have class that week. And then when we come back, we'll just sort of review things. I'll have a template, then you can start to at least the start of a template. You can use your own template if you want to start to begin to formulate your own sort of presentation about your process and where you're at. But at least have like the sort of, a checklist of like, so you're not missing anything at that time, right? So that's where we sort of switch a point. We start going downhill, right? And getting some momentum, where not only are you making design decisions and doing stuff and building models, but you're thinking about, okay, where have I been? Where am I going? What do I want at the end? And we'll do that habitually at the end of every week. You'll basically give your presentation several weeks in a row before you actually have to give your final presentation to somebody externally. Okay. All right. So that's where this is kind of going. And time flies. But so over the weekend, that's what I want you guys to try. I want you guys to try these tools, the SunPath and the solar radiation. Look, I didn't do this before, but the SunPath stuff, for instance, if I have just the summer ones on, I could have put the SunPath on as well, and or even make 2D that out so I could superimpose it and start to play around with it in Illustrator, right? Over top of this, right? So I could just take the summer rays, summer spheres, and the sun paths, and overlay them on top of this as well. And then I could do the same thing for the winter ones and same thing for the March/September ones, right? So there's ways you can start to fold some of this information together, where now I start to see, that would be interesting and hopeful. I say that because then you start to get a visual of like, well, where's the sun in the sky in relationship to all of these shadows that I see? And you start to put two and two together, I think, really quickly, right? Anybody can when they see it that way, right? So does it make sense as well? We have a few minutes and I'm still recording, so maybe I'll just open up Windows again, and I'll just go through those steps really quickly and remind you about Make 2D versus turning these things on in render mode.
When you get a second after you go through this, would you mind walking through how you added the B reps as you were going through inputting
Sure
those
can.
calculations?
Yep, sure will.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, Windows is doing so much better now. Look at that. My goodness. You can always tell like when there's a lag between when you hit a key on a keyboard and then like you see the letter show up. Like if you can notice the lag, then it's a lag, right? And it didn't do it this time. So I don't know what was going on before, but all right. And why I recommend putting things on different layers is sometimes when you're in the thick of things, you bake something out, or you publish one of those PNGs out, and you go, oh man, I forgot to turn off the summer suns and turn on the winter suns when I then turned on the winter radiation or whatever, right? Like so sometimes it's helpful just to be able to go back and just turn the right layers on and off and double check those things. I'm not sure what it's doing here, except I tried to open up an application before Windows was ready, I guess. I'll open up Solar Analysis, why not? And I wonder if I opened up Rhino twice. Yeah, I did. Look at that. Oh boy. So there's a second instance of Rhino that I actually don't need. Here we go. Right. So let me just go to shaded really quickly. I will need the layers. Let's see. Let's move that out of the way. Hey, come on. Let's see here. Let me set this back to one of these ISOs. Southeast, why not? I'll turn on summer radiation. I'll turn off this geometry so I can see a little better. I can turn on the sun pads and summer rays and summer spheres. And let's see what that looks like in rendered mode. Oof, it doesn't look awful, but there's a couple things that are bugging me. One is that all the curves that are being rendered are showing up as the sort of layer colors instead of just black, which drives me crazy. So let me see, rendered, show curves, objects, curves, use the object's color. No, use single color for all curves, make them black. Right. And then the sun really kind of the suns disappear. I'm actually rendering those, so I could go to, let's see, summer spheres. I could select all these objects. I could then make a custom material. Let's make another sort of plaster material. So I could do it this way, or I could go into Illustrator and do it there. Let's see, plaster, color picker. Let's pick a different color. Let's give it a little bit of a mustard. Oof. All right. Assign to objects. Let's see what that looks like. All right. At least now I can see the darn things. It's a lot of red and yellow, though. It looks like McDonald's or something. So from here, I could export this out, and I'll do that here in a minute. Capture to file with sun paths. Transparent background, sure. This was summertime. Let's see here. PNG. Just append this with sun paths. All right. So really quickly, let me open up Grasshopper and just address what you talked about, Nathan. Let's see. Oh, come on now. All right. Let's see here. Direct radiation. Here we go. Now, hopefully it won't ask me for a weather file because I saved it with everything set to false, right? So until I set this to true, it's not going to ask me for a weather file and do any of these calculations down here, which is what slows everything down. So right here, there's two. First of all, I'm sort of zoomed in, but if I zoom out, I look at the these sort of purple violet boxes, right? I highlighted those with these notes just to sort of as a reminder. This is where we input the stuff that we actually want to sort of measure and then map a false color map onto. I right click on that widget and say set multiple BREPs, and then that's the cue for Grasshopper to close or disappear for a while, allowing me to see Rhino and select geometry in Rhino to reference in. When I'm done with that, I hit enter, and Grasshopper pops back up. And the same thing with the building context or masses, things that might be occluding or shading, but I don't necessarily want to map onto those. So I can right click and say set multiple VREPs. Grasshopper disappears. I can select these boxes of, the massings from my neighbors and, neighboring buildings and things like that. Right click when I'm done. And then Grasshopper shows back up. Okay. So that's how I did that. Does that make sense? Sorry, I can't even see my screen. Did that address what you're asking, Nate?
Yeah, it did. It did. That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll run it before we jump off and
Okay.
make sure that it worked appropriately. Thanks.
All right. Perfect. Let me close this. Let me close this. See, it's asking me I didn't save my Grasshopper file. So it's asking me, do you want to save? You have unsaved documents. This is your last chance to save. Any changes, I'm just going to close. I'm not going to save that. And get this shutting down. It's going to tell me that, I don't know what it'll tell me. Let's see. In the meantime, where did Illustrator go? There we are. Then look, you might not like the rendered version of that sun. I wouldn't blame you. It's not really my cup of tea either. Let's see here. But now that we have it on there, oh, it's large. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, the other interesting thing is that it made this much smaller compared to the overall graphic. So I'd probably rescale this accordingly before I would have baked that in. So yeah, you can tell that I've done this sort of ad hoc instead of all at the same time. There are other ways of doing that sun. I could come in here in Illustrator and begin to make something that's going to sort of overlap that, give it a line weight, or maybe just having the line around it actually looks better. But yeah, anyway, just seems a little odd to not have that. Oops. Have a line around that. Everything else has line work on it. So suddenly the sun sort of sticks out in that regard. Not in a good way, necessarily. Just a little too large, darn it. This is going to drive me crazy. So you guys get to work and then shout at me if you run into any problems. We have about 15 minutes or so. So nice thing is since it's an axon, all the spheres are exactly the same each time. So now that's kind of funky. So what I'm going to do there is split a stroke with a stroke. Let's see here. How do I do that? Is it path? Can't remember. Divide objects below. Transform arrange, bring to front. Do that one. Let's see. Path, divide objects below. Let's see, I want to get rid of that. So let me bring this up to the front. See, this is where I hate Illustrator. Probably irrationally, but it is what it is. Right. So I'm just going around and fine tuning things on my end to make things look consistent. But again, I would say that this is kind of small compared to the compass around it. So I probably would have Probably should have readjusted that. If I had more time, I would have done that before bringing this out. Darn. Live and learn. Let me go ahead and stop sharing and stop recording. You guys are just trying